Hey, I want to tell you, here we're going to talk about the Gambit. Hey everybody, Sexy Matt the Pharaoh Wizard here. So, I thought, but since we're between big blockbuster movies for me to review right now, that I'd do something I've been thinking about doing for a little bit, and that is do a character profile on a comic book character and really go into detail about their past and their accomplishments within that comic universe. And what better place to start than everyone's favorite Cajun, Monsieur Gambit.
Life don't get much better than this.
Gambit is my absolute favorite comic book character. Some people think I'm obsessed just because I may or may not have a shrine dedicated to him. I may or may not have a tattoo of him. I do have a few comic books of his. And I may or may not have overreacted when Channing Tatum was cast as Gambit. There is no God! But I've loved him ever since the 90s show. I've really gone to his history, and he is just fantastic. And I want to tell you all about Gambit. So let's get into it. Gambit was first introduced in July of 1990 in a cameo appearance in Uncanny X-Men Annual number 14. And he had his first full appearance 1 month later in August in Uncanny X-Men number 266. And he was created by Chris Claremont and the famous Jim Lee. So, Gambit's full name is Remy LeBeau. His official word on his power is he can use his own kinetic energy to hyper-excite molecules and inanimate objects to the point of combustion. Or the way he puts it,
First we charge the card, then we blow it up.
He is part of the New Orleans Thieves Guild, he's part of the X-Men, he's part of X Factor, he's part of the Externals, and I believe he was once part of a boy band. I don't know, maybe. He's been romantically linked with many people, most famously Rogue. So the interesting part of Gambit's history is we were introduced to him when he was a fully grown adult, and he had a few years in the X-Men where he had a mysterious history, and no one knew a whole lot about him. So most of his past that I'm going to be going through here is retconned throughout later comics. So it gets a little hazy, a little crazy, but I think I piled together a good timeline of events of what happened. And of course I'm not going to go through every single adventure he ever went on, because we ain't got all day here. So let's jump into it. So when Gambit was born, or Remy if you want to call him, was born, he was stolen from a New Orleans hospital and was called Le Diable Blanc, which is the White Devil, referring to his black eyes with red pupils, which is not part of his mutation, but it is something he was born with. He was, of course, stolen by the New Orleans Thieves Guild because it was prophesied that Le Diable Blanc would unite all the guilds of New Orleans under one banner. And once he was kidnapped, he was given to the Fanga mob, who is a smaller offshoot of the Thieves Guild, mostly of younger children, kind of be raised. And at age 10, Gambit tried to pickpocket a man named Jean-Luc Lebeau, who was the patriarch of the Thieves Guild. And to put it in a simpler way, it was like a cardinal trying to bless the Pope. So obviously it didn't work out too well for Gambit, but Jean-Luc did find something he liked in the kid and adopted him and raised him as his own, and Gambit rightfully calls Jean-Luc his father. Alright, so that was his really young time. Let's get into his teenage years. So at the age of 15, all thieves are put into a tithe, which is a test to where they need to perform thievery to prove that they're part of the Thieves Guild. So Gambit was tasked to steal from the immortal being Kandra. Unfortunately, it didn't work out too well, and he was captured, and he was sold to the deformed kind of being, mutant thing known as the Pig, because comics. The Pig is known for raising soldiers for the Hydra, and you all should know Hydra by now from the movies, and they are a big part of the comics as well. So, Gambit was put into this camp, supposed to be trained as a soldier. Now, at this time, Gambit's powers were first developing. Before he was kidnapped, he was kind of working on them in private, because being a mutant is not a good thing, apparently. So, he was kind of developing his powers at this time. And the escape is a big moment in his life. When he did escape this camp, he was able to use his powers and find the offensive ability of them. And also at this time is when he learned that playing cards are his best weapon, because what he says, they hold a charge best. But also when you think about it, they're like 52 little mini grenades that you can hold in a single pack, and you can have multiple packs, and it's just a good idea to have a crap ton of explosives like that sometimes. I think so. So once he escaped the Pig, he rejoined the Thieves Guild, and all was well for a while. This next one doesn't really fit precisely in the timeline. I think I kind of found where it fits, but there's not a whole lot of detail. But at one point, Mr. Sinister, who is a changed being from Apocalypse, changed him into this immortal being because of his ability to manipulate mutations. And he's become a doctor who studies mutants and gives himself powers, and he's all sorts of crazy, and hopefully we get him in a movie soon. So Mr. Sinister hired the Thieves Guild to steal some notes he made for the Weapon X program. Of course, the Weapon X program is what gave Wolverine his metal claws. So Gambit and some other thieves go in to steal the plans for him, and he actually sees Wolverine's escape and is a little bit a part of his escape from Weapon X. It's just kind of a nice little note that he's tied in with Wolverine and Mr. Sinister quite a bit. So when he got older, he was arranged to marry Belladonna Bordeaux, I believe is how you say it, who was the daughter of the patriarch of the Assassin's Guild. So now let me get into these guilds, because I've said a few times that exist in the comics in New Orleans. So there's two main guilds. You got your Thieves Guild and you got your Assassins Guild. And they've been warring with each other for years for lots of different reasons. One of the most that was mentioned in the cartoon, so most people kind of know about it, is they compete for the favor for these beings called immortals. And these immortals bestow them with longer life when whichever guild is in their favor. It's kind of a long, ridiculous explanation. See Gambit Volume 1 for the most detailed version of this. But the long and short of it is the Thieves Guild and the Assassins Guild don't like each other. They've been warring for years and years and years. And so they're basically like your Capulets and your Montagues. Or for your younger kids out there, your Team Jacobs versus your Team Edwards. Yeah, I went there. What are you going to do? So Gambit was supposed to marry Belladonna. And this was going to reunite the two guilds, being that they're, kind of like how they used to do in Middle Ages, where two kingdoms would marry their children and create a stronger union between the two. The problem is Belladonna's brother Julian opposed this wedding and challenged Remy to a duel. And the ending is Gambit killed Julian. Now, after he killed him, he was exiled from the Thieves Guild and New Orleans altogether. But I don't know how else a duel would have ended, so I don't know what they really expected. Would Julian have gotten exiled if he won? I don't know. It's weird. Duels are very odd. So, he was kind of out on his own and had many weird adventures that they kind of call back to. This is more of his dark, hazy past we haven't seen a lot of. And it's kind of used as a tool for writers to say, like, oh, I know that guy because we did such and such back when, before I was an X-Men kind of thing. So while he was wandering around doing all this stuff, his powers began to fluctuate. Now, if you're unaware, in the comics, a lot of times mutant powers tend to fluctuate. They'll get too powerful, they'll start losing their powers. It's kind of a known thing. Sometimes it's a virus, sometimes it's just natural progression of their mutation, things like that. So his power started becoming unstable and he couldn't handle it anymore. So he went to his old friend, Mr. Sinister, to fix that. Mr. Sinister was like, cool, I'll fix your powers, but you have to do a couple things for me. So he put Gambit on a few missions. The most specific one is he was to lead the Marauders into the sewers of New York to find the Morlocks. The Morlocks are a group of mutants that are physically deformed, that can't live in normal society, so they live in the sewers. Unbeknownst to Gambit, the Marauders were supposed to kill the Morlocks because Mr. Sinister found them to be a lesser version of mutation and therefore did not have the right to exist because Mr. Sinister is a dick. So once he leads the Marauders down to the sewers, it becomes this massacre and it's known as the Morlock Massacre, which is kind of a big point within mutant history within the Marvel Universe. Now, during this massacre, he was able to save one child named Sarah, who would grow up to be Morrow. Yeah, Morrow. So I guess something came of it, but yeah, that's a very dark section of Gambit's life, which will come back to haunt him later. So now we finally meet up with Gambit from where he was first introduced to us in the comics. In Uncanny X-Men number 266, he found a de-aged Storm who was fighting a battle against the Shadow King, helped her out with that deal, and she brought him to Xavier to join the X-Men. When the X-Men were split into two teams, he was part of the blue team and had many X-Men adventures with them. And this is where, about the same time the cartoon came out, and where he became very popular. It was right around this time when he was a main section of the X-Men. He won't always be in the X-Men, but this is his main run with the X-Men, is roughly 1990 to 95-ish. It's kind of when he spent the most time as an X-Men. Of course, during this time, he is when he met Rogue, and an interesting writer's note is supposed to just kind of be an offshoot joke of this, macho guy hitting on the girl he can't touch with all his, Cajun swagger. And it was supposed to be just kind of this one-shot little joke, maybe some tongue-in-cheek things, but it actually ended up being one of the longest-running relationships in Marvel history, interesting enough, and is the most recognizable. At a con, when you see someone cosplaying as Rogue, you generally see a Gambit nearby, and when you see a Gambit, you always see a Rogue nearby. It's just happening. Rogue and Gambit are, the most recognizable, at least mutant couple, but I'd say comic book couple outside of Mary Jane and Peter Parker. With another adventure with the X-Men, they found themselves in a bunker in Antarctica trying to fight Eric the Red, who is actually Magneto in disguise because comics. During this, they get captured, and Magneto holds a mock trial for Gambit, talking about his crimes against mutants. Rogue used her powers to absorb his memories, and she told everyone about the Morlock Massacre and his involvement with that. And because of this, he was exiled from the X-Men and actually left in Antarctica to die, because apparently X-Men are dicks. And this is where his Volume 3 series, which is the longest running solo series of his, kicks off. When he's in Antarctica, he's saved by a being known as the New Sun. In the series of comics, with having multiple things going on, also dealt with him trying to figure out who this New Sun is. Spoiler, it turns out New Sun is a alternate dimension version of Gambit whose powers have gotten so out of control that in his own dimension he actually destroyed the atmosphere with his power. So that happened. And there's a ton of other stuff happened with this comic. Some time travel going on, some wackiness with Deadpool happened. It's a good run. So in the early 2000s, Gambit rejoins the X-Men briefly and is blinded when one of his cards goes off in his face. And being upset being blinded and, kind of handicapped for his first time, he takes a lot of it out on Rogue, not physically, a little bit verbally, and creates a rift within their relationship, which has never really settled back in, and currently right now they are not together. Anyways, once he healed from the blindness, another adventure he went on is when Apocalypse returned, he offered himself up as one of the Horsemen in hopes of joining Apocalypse's rank, finding some weaknesses, gaining his trust, things like that, and became the Horseman of Death. Upon this, though, he did not know Apocalypse's powers and could not accomplish anything and was completely taken over by Apocalypse. Oops. More recently, he had some ties with some big events happening within the X-Men world. The main one being the Messiah Complex storyline. Now, the Messiah Complex... Oh man, how do I even explain that if you don't know? Alright. So, the Scarlet Witch lost her mind and used her ability to kill almost every single mutant in the world, which was called the Decimation, which knocked down mutant population to about 2% of what it used to be. That number may be wrong, but that's what I'm going with. In the Messiah Complex storyline, there was a mutant born, and it's the first mutant born since the Decimation. Now, she is what's known as a born mutant. I think they also have a different name for it, but there's a kind of a separate race of mutants who were born with abilities, like Nightcrawler was born blue and with a tail. Multiple Man is actually born with his mutation. There's a few others. This mutant would eventually become Hope Summers, who's supposed to be the messiah of all mutants, and depending on who you talk to, is either the savior of all mutants or the destroyer of all mutants. So when she was born, her power was so great that it shorted out Cerebro and caused just everyone to rush to her birthplace to try and steal her. And Gambit is seen with the Marauders during this, trying to steal the baby, and successfully did. But Gambit's true use of the baby was he thought she could help Rogue, who's, like I said, mutant powers fluctuate. Rogue's power was fluctuating, and this time she can no longer control it. So he thought the baby would be able to help her. No one really knew what her power was. And she actually was able to help Rogue. This is at the point where Rogue lost her flight and strength abilities and was actually able to control her touch to where she can hold on to multiple powers. She can leave powers. She basically got control of her powers because of Hope Summers. So Gambit, seemingly doing something evil, was actually just trying to help out Rogue, as you do when you're in love with Rogue. So during the Second Coming storyline, which is the sequel to Messiah Complex, so at the end of Messiah Complex, Cable, who's a mutant from the future, takes the baby and goes into the future away from everybody to raise her, being chased by Bishop, and that's a whole nother crazy storyline that I don't need to go into. But Second Coming is when she returns to the present time. And it starts this whole big war with everybody trying to kill her, use her, whatever. And starts this whole big war. It's actually a pretty cool storyline and has some pretty interesting fights. Gambit was sent with a bunch of other mutants to Limbo to recover Magic, who is a mutant with many abilities, but she's also a teleporter, and teleporters were a big hoopla within this storyline because of obvious they can teleport stuff. Yeah. So that's where we see him. Now, he kind of dropped off for a little bit, and recently, I want to say 2013, maybe 2014, popped up with another solo series. Now, I want to say I think this is volume 5. Don't quote me on that. But it's kind of an interesting series where he's trying to figure out where he needs to be. And it's almost kind of meta, because it feels like the creators just didn't know what to do with Gambit, and they're just trying to figure out where he would fit best. And at the end, he's being pursued by Jean-Luc, his dad, and being told he can be the patriarch of the Thieves Guild. Rogue, who is now an Avenger, offered him a spot as an Avenger. I believe he's offered to come back to the X-Men, and he denied all that, and he decided to join X-Factor. Now, X-Factor had many different iterations. This specific one is a corporate-run mutant team in the books of All New X-Factor, and it was terrible. I don't even know what they're trying to accomplish with this, but yeah, they're basically a corporate-sponsored mutant team. I don't know. But when that was canceled, rightfully so, we have not seen Gambit since. So who knows where he's at right now. He's probably banging some hot broad. Alright, so Gambit, being one of the most popular X-Men, was actually appeared in every outside the comic version of X-Men there ever has been. But he has the biggest changes to his character within each iteration. So I thought it'd be cool to kind of go through those really quickly and tell you kind of his characterization. So of course, he first popped up in the 90s X-Men. Like I said, this was when he was the most popular and when he was still in the X-Men. And surprisingly enough, this is the only outside the comic version of X-Men that has Gambit as an X-Men.
The name is Gambit. Remember it.
And you know, he gets the most screen time with this one. He's in most of the episodes. You learn all about his cool swagger and his history, and it's an amazing version of Gambit. This cartoon still holds up to today, except for the final season. But it's still awesome to check out, and he's still great in it. Now, after the movies kind of kicked off and repopularized X-Men, they came out with X-Men Evolution. This version of Gambit was part of the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants. He's in a handful of episodes. He does kidnap Rogue at one point. You don't get a lot of his history. He's more kind of a hired goon in this version.
Hired goons?
Not my favorite, and not my favorite design either, but that's worth mentioning. Later, there's a cartoon, a very underrated cartoon known as Wolverine and the X-Men. And I definitely suggest you check it out. It only lasts one season, and I think is a fantastic season. This version of Gambit was just a straight thief and was hired to steal a mutant-suppressing collar from a company. And he, again, only appears in a handful of episodes, but he's kind of this interesting force throughout it, where he kind of sets off this whole chain of events with his thievery. And an interesting thing in this version is he doesn't have a romance with Rogue at all. It's actually with Polaris, one of Magneto's daughters, which, watch yourself. He had a cool design. Like I said, he's not in very many episodes in this version, but definitely worth bringing up and definitely worth checking out. Now, finally, the live action Gambits. Oh boy. So Gambit appeared in X-Men Origins Wolverine, the worst X-Men movie ever. The characterization in this one's kind of rough because he's barely in it, and apparently in this version he can make cards float. Okay. He's played by Taylor Kitsch. The accent sucks. There's not a lot to him. I don't know. I was bummed out because I was really excited to see Gambit in an X-Men movie. And, man. But since Days of Future Past reset the entire X-Men movie universe, they are set to give him his own solo movie, which was supposed to come out in October of this year, but has been pushed off to some future date that they don't know. So basically, right now it's in development hell. And of course, Channing Tatum is set to play Gambit. We had some small hope that he might have left the project, but he said he's still on board. There's really not a lot known about what the villain is, where it's taking place. I believe someone was cast as Belladonna, so maybe his early days in New Orleans. I don't know. I don't know. Hashtag stop the Tatum. So hopefully this video interested you in everyone's favorite Cajun outside farmer, Fran.
Now, homie, wait, mate.
You like to see homos naked?
And, you know, I'll let you know a little bit about the history of Gambit and some cool stuff coming out. Now, some suggested reading for you. Like I said, his longest running solo series, Volume 3, 24 issues, very good to read. But you do have to give it some extra leeway for the time frame that it was in. Well, it's a late 90s comic book, so you got some of that late 90s cheese and a lot of shenanigans with a whole bunch of stuff. So you have to give it a little bit of leeway, but I find that one the best read if you're willing to go there. If you want something a little bit more modern, Volume 4, which took place, I want to say 2003-ish, maybe a little bit later. That one's a little bit, it's a 12-issue run. It's a little bit funner, just kind of him goofing around in New Orleans. But it was really good, too. So I'd say, yeah, Volume 3 or Volume 4 is your best go-tos for some Gambit reading. Check out Wolverine and the X-Men, and, of course, the 90s X-Men for some good cartoon versions of him. And yeah, I hope you guys like this kind of character study. I have some other characters I'd love to do this one on. If you have suggestions for characters you would love to see, a detailed history and let me ramble on forever about them, let me know in the comments. And I sex him at the fail, wizard. Till next time, hold on to your whole thoughts.
My precious.